Hello all, I hope you are doing well in these very, very, very strange times. Welcome to the FinTech Finance Virtual Arena where we're hosting you today. Today, and I'm quite excited about this because it's a bit of a passion area for myself. We're going to be looking at financial inclusion. And by that, I don't just mean ensuring that everybody in the world has a bank account. I'm looking at every element of financial inclusion, whether it be all the way through to mortgages, through to payments, through to the cost of withdrawing cash, to ensure that everyone anywhere in the world has the right sort of access to financial services. Joining me today, we've actually got a bit of a stellar lineup. We've got Edwin Chung from Money. How are you doing today, Edwin? Congrats on the crowd fundraising.
Yeah, thank you. It's been it's an adventure.
We also have David Pope from Who Are You? How are you doing today, David?
Yeah, good. Hi, Ali. Hello, everybody. Happy Friday.
Excellent. I've got to ask, what's the most embarrassing book? Because we did interview someone who very clearly had a Kama Sutra behind them. So what's on the shelf that you don't really want to show off?
Oh, I've got my trashy novels on the other side, on the other shelf. So I'll apologise. Yeah, obviously I've put my best books on this shelf, haven't I?
Is that 50 Shades of Grey there?
No.
Excellent. And lastly, we've got Diana Brocklebank. How are you doing today, Diane?
I'm great, thank you, Ali. Thank you for having me, and hello, everybody else.
Excellent. No embarrassing books I can see behind you.
No, just a radiator and a garden.
Excellent. Very, very, very classy. We like that. Well, let's go straight into it. The first thing I want to throw open to the whole panel is, how is fintech, and by that I mean the technology side of financial services, how has it enabled financial inclusion for, in the first instance, the unbanked people over the last few years? What has it really propelled this segment to do? Did you want to take that first, Edwin?
Yeah, sure. I think fintech's been incredible in this regard, especially the technology aspect of it. I mean, I think obviously one angle that it's been able to really tremendously help with is just cost, right? And just lowering cost all around the board, and enables people to reach more audiences, service them better, obviously operate more cost effectively, right? So that broadens the reach, not just to connect to disadvantaged or marginalized audiences, but also service them better, right? So I think that's one way that it's really made an impact. I think another way that technology's really kind of played a role in this thing is just with data as well, and providing access to alternative types of data, and kind of ways to analyze that data that lets you evaluate people's different financial situations in more ways, right? To include them into the mainstream financial system, and kind of giving them opportunities that they might have otherwise been missed or declined, right? So you see that with people now offering loans based on the use of their mobile phone data, right? Like, or their contact list, or their basically their digital footprint, right? And people realizing that these are also valid ways of evaluating someone's situation. And I think the end result is it brings more people into the mainstream financial system. I think that's just a win for everybody.
Absolutely. Diane, did you want to add to that?
Sure. I guess from our perspective, if you look at some of the characteristics of fintech, it's about flexibility, it's about scalability, and the fact that fintechs can bring solutions to market very quickly. They are unencumbered by legacy systems, and I think that has been an enormous sort of driver in helping to bring the financially excluded into the financial system.
Absolutely. And obviously on the prepaid side of things, David, that is quite a speedy way to enable cards into the ecosystem.
Yeah, so for me, fintechs, they solve a problem that mainstream financial services wasn't catering to, and that's why we've seen the rise of the fintech. They isolate a problem, and they dev and they build features to solve that problem. So that's why we've seen fintechs be so successful, because they're solving a problem that the mainstream banks, mainstream financial services companies haven't even known that the customers were suffering from, and they're solving that. And that's particularly true in the e-money space, and that's particularly true in the e-money and prepaid space for the financial inclusion priority, and that's why they're seeing so much success.
And in regards to money, Edwin, so the fact, in terms of some of the target customers that you're having, are you expecting them to be people that don't really have that electronic ledger before, or are you expecting it to be more people that, are you more focused on people who are currently using cash as opposed to currently using a bank account?
I don't think we currently make a distinction between that in a really major way. I think it's just, in general, we'd like to get more people into the economy, right? I think that there's, kind of two aspects to that. One is with the people who are, maybe using cash primarily up to this point, like you said, getting them an account in the first place is beneficial, because then they can start establishing that digital footprint, right? And then once they do have that digital footprint with us, or combined with other financial institutions through open banking, right, it allows us to get I think a fairer picture of their situation, right, rather than relying on, in the past it just may have been like credit scores, right, which are limited to just certain sets of data and excluded, a lot of people because they couldn't establish a credit record without a credit card. They couldn't get a credit card because they never, so being able to kind of accumulate that data over time, I think we can very quickly get a picture of, like, if this person's getting, money coming in on a regular basis, they're not spending above their inflows are not, lower than their outflows, right? And then that gives them the opportunity to kind of take advantage of other services. Like, I think an easy one would be like loans, right? Like, a lot of loan providers in the past may have only looked at like a certain set of data, or they might have only had a certain set of data available to them. Now, having a broader picture of what people are doing, we can kind of make loan appraisals based on that, right? And so I think that unlocks more opportunities for them. And then, so I think product-wise, that's a service that we can offer them, right? And I think, kind of going back to something that Diane said, this information also lets you see just broader consumer behavior in general, right? So then it's not just about here we can offer you a loan, or here we can do this transaction for you, but like, what are you interested in, right? And how can we make your overall experience better, right? And that's not so much like, here's a bunch of products and services that we're trying to sell you, but here's how we can make the experience better for you, your life, whatever, to be really idealistic, your life better for you, or simpler. Yeah.
So, but it all starts with data, because until you actually know that problem, you're not even aware it's actually there. You're not aware that there's anything to solve.
Right.
Okay.
I think.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Edwin.
Yeah, just to kind of add on to that real quickly, I think it's kind of like, the obvious parallels with like, when you're surfing the web, right? Like, it's just like Google picks up like on where you're going and the sites you're going to and what you're interested in, whatever, and you get retargeted based on that, right? Now it's just like you're establishing a digital financial footprint, and then that also kind of gives you data, right? So it's a double-edged sword, of course, right? Like, I mean, you don't want to use, you don't want to just like suddenly inundate people with a bunch of target ads that are just kind of cumbersome, right? But I think it does also offer the opportunity to personalize experiences.
But if, for example, you see that somebody is, for example, and this is just off the top of the dome, going to the same cash point and withdrawing £10 but paying £2 to that ATM in order to withdraw it, you may think, hey, you can actually do a transfer from one person to another. Again, in a very simple terms, those are the kind of insights that then brings that person and educates that person into making transactions.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's really, that's a really good observation. I think one example that we like to use is really similar to that. Like, if you see someone always, buying like a daily rail pass or commuter pass or whatever, right? And they're just, after a while you may say like, it would be more cost effective if you got the monthly pass, right? And maybe you can't, maybe that's too big of an expense one time for you, whatever, but we could, crowdsource a PDP loan for you to get you there at a lower price than like the aggregate total of all the daily passes, right?
That was a really simple, really dumbed down version of an example from myself. I want to talk about the UK because, look, I'm sorry America, I'm sorry China, we are the capital of... Actually, I think there's elements everywhere, but I like to think the UK is one of the most mature fintech markets in the world. And it seems kind of almost a little bit unusual to hear about the lack of financial inclusion within the UK. So Diane, with your prepaid hat on, how many people do you in the UK? And it's quite a tricky question. It seems a black and white. But how many people do you think don't have access to electronic or card payments? And who very much are the underbanked people in the UK that we're not even really aware of?
Yeah, well, I guess in terms of who the underbanked people are, there are lots of socio-economic and cultural reasons why people are unbanked or don't have a bank account. And it could quite simply be that they've just had a really bad experience with their provider. But I think also a lot of people are left out of the design of financial products. So these are people who are in a society who may have been discriminated against, they may be marginalised. And, you have some very vulnerable consumer groups that, they may not have the ID to open a bank account, they may be temporary or migrant workers. They could be people who don't have access to the technology. So if you think about how many people don't have access to a smartphone, and going back to what I was saying about people who kind of live on the periphery of society, a lot of people are in dire straits and they rely on very informal ways of banking, whether that's, doorstep lenders, whether it's, just using cash and putting it under the mattress, borrowing from friends and family. There are many different reasons why in an obviously mature fintech market and a buoyant economy, why there should be those people.
David, can I get you to weigh in here? Because obviously with who it all comes down to onboarding, especially around IDs. How do you enable inclusion for people from all walks of life to actually onboard? And by that, I don't just mean migrant workers. I also mean, say, for example, somebody who is physically or mentally disabled.
Yeah, sure. So who's really here to verify the customers that the traditional approach to identity verification can't? The old school world of checking a database, confirm a name and address and date of birth, it's no longer the defence it used to be against fraud, but it also doesn't work for everybody in life, and it can actually create financial exclusion by using that approach. So HooYu is designed to be able to verify the identity of anybody from any country, no matter where they are, no matter what kind of ID document they're using. And also we make that process easy for them. So let's suppose you're a Polish dude here in London. You're applying for an account with a company that's using HooYu. HooYu will automatically detect the settings on your device and automatically serve you the HooYu UI in Romanian or Polish or Bulgarian or whichever language you're using on your device. So HooYu is designed really not just to enable identity verification for people from any country, but to make it really easy for them and help them get to the end of the process. Though in terms of your question, Ali, you talked about exclusion not just in terms of nationality or geography, but also in terms of disability. And one of the things we've been doing a lot of work on recently at HooYu is accessibility, and we're about to release a new UI that really takes into account some of those really important things. So say, for example, screen readers. the new UI will actually make sure that the screen reader only reads out the relevant parts of the screen to help the user through the process and not confuse them. The new UI we're launching means that the user can go from start to finish without using a mouse. If they can't use a mouse, for example, they can now tab through every single field. So we're working towards AA certification for accessibility, and of course we'll get that tested externally by a provider as well.
And Edwin, of course, looking again at the UK, where do you see in this mature fintech market, where do you see some of the gaps where you guys can, of course, slot in?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple areas, right? I mean, there's what you traditionally think of, like you mentioned, just the migrant worker sort of situation. I think you also have people, I think David kind of touched on this maybe inadvertently or not, like, I don't know if they're really migrant workers, but just kind of, other foreign nationals in there who may be living in the UK, but for whatever reason, it's just because residency or whatever, it's just difficult for them to get a proper British bank account, right? And then you also have, I think, another area that's kind of popped up for us is just industries that are considered kind of like high risk industries. So whether it's crypto or gambling or CBD or whatever, like all of these businesses tend to be somewhat shunned by the traditional banking structure. So those guys, I think, are somewhat locked out or underbanked in some ways, and they're very frustrated with like the additional barriers that they face, and they just have to overcome more hurdles to kind of be able to do the same stuff as any other business. So those guys are very eager to find solutions that let them just move money like normally. Like, they could be a completely legitimate business, but just because of the industry they're in, everyone just looks at them with an added level of suspicion, right? And then I think you have, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, people who just don't fit standard credit assessments or usage patterns or whatever, and because of that, they just miss out on opportunities.
With that in mind, I did want to touch a little bit on prepay as a in terms of regulation. For example, and I'm thinking back to kind of the pre-pandemic times, you would have a lot of students come over, a lot of people go, for example, I personally, a long time ago, I spent about half a year teaching scuba diving on the other side of the world, and I was using purely cash. When you're in the fintech bubble, so to speak, when you're inside the M25, you tend to not be very outward looking at other people and other people's needs. And how big is the prepaid market in terms of what are some of the elements that people don't really think about where they should have a prepaid card instead of just sticking with cash?
I think it's key to understand what actually prepaid is. And if you think of it in terms of prepaid technology or prepaid fintech, as it were, so prepaid underpins an enormous amount of products that you don't necessarily think as being a prepaid card or a prepaid wallet. So the use case for prepaid has grown so much in the last few years. That it's allowing, many fintechs now, it's become, prepaid is an enormous fintech enabler. So it allows fintechs to bring new solutions to market very, very quickly that rely on prepaid technology. So the use cases vary, as I said, enormously, from obviously traditional kind of travel money products, products that are designed for students going on their gap years. And, one of the biggest use cases, we've seen is around offering an alternative to a business bank account. So we're seeing a lot of growth in that area. because a lot of very small businesses and freelancers, sole traders have kind of reached an nadir with their traditional business banks that you see on the high street. So we're seeing a lot of movement there. And I think in the context of COVID-19, it's allowed companies who were formerly relying on cash to rapidly digitize their payments. And I'm thinking particularly of the charity sector. So, we have members who have been working with charities right the way through the pandemic to bring their products onto a prepaid solution. So, prepaid is not just about serving the underbanked, it's the use case is wider, but I think in the context of financial inclusion, there's an enormous opportunity for fintechs to leverage that technology.
Absolutely, it's a very useful part of that Swiss Army knife of what's available out there.
Sure.
Cool. The last thing I want to touch on is we gotta finish by looking at the future. Once the financially underserved people have become banked, in an ideal world, what comes next? Will there be new products that can and should be offered? What is on the horizon over the next few years? Edmund, did you want to take this to start? What's on the future of inclusion?
Sure. I think it's interesting because I think addressing financial inclusion really forces you to look at the way that services are provided, right? Not just what are the products and services, but how are they being delivered. And I think that will lead us past think in terms of how do we adapt existing channels to make them more accessible to people, and rather looking at is there a better way of solving this problem for everyone, right? So maybe, kind of an example of that would just be okay, instead of saying okay, we made you a wheelchair that can climb stairs, it should be, forget about stairs, here's an elevator, right? And the elevator helps everyone, right? So instead of saying, here's a bunch of products we offer and look guys, we made them more accessible, I think the future is more about meeting people where they are in their daily interactions and figuring out how to be there to help them, right? So
I just pause you there. That's such a good analogy. I just want to reiterate that because that's so good, that we want to build an elevator as opposed to give someone a wheelchair that can climb stairs. That's brilliant.
Nice. So I think it's about finding ways to embed ourselves in channels that people use and they're already comfortable with. And I think you're starting to see that happen already. I think with it's kind of like Amazon wanting to put payments in their app and their website, so you never have to leave them, right? It's just all included. It's about when you get into an Uber for the first time, you don't want to think about connecting your bank account. It's why can't you just bring your financial identity with you? And what they started doing for drivers, where they were offering their drivers a built-in bank account, so they could just get paid more directly and then use that to pay for gas. It's an all-in-one solution instead of thinking about your bank is separate and as a driver, Uber does this for you. It's the use case is I'm an Uber driver. What are all the things I need, right? Just like Shopify getting into financial solutions these days. It's as a merchant, I need to worry about inventory management, order fulfillment, but I also need a merchant account, right? So why should that be a whole separate thing? I'm just worried about setting up my storefront, and these are all the things I need for it, right? So I think it's reorienting yourself around that and bringing it back to I guess fintech in general. Maybe you could think of when you're going to pay for something, maybe it's a higher price ticket than you're used to, right? Why not be able to get a loan approved on the spot when you're making the transaction, rather than thinking about I want to buy this thing, so in order to do that, I need to apply for this loan, and then I need the loan to get into my bank account, and then now I can go make the purchase, right? Because that's just the high friction, I think, experience. It's a lot easier if you can just do it at point of purchase. And there's nothing new about getting P2P loans that way, right? But it's the way they're being delivered at point of purchase that's the innovation, right? It just makes the overall experience better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. So I think it just becomes about the experience, right? We talk about user experience, customer experience. I think now maybe the next step is just like, not UX, it's like FX, right? The financial experience.
Oh, that's another good sniff. I like that there. I'm gonna stick with that. Right, David. No pressure. You're onto yourself now. What's on the horizon?
Okay, I'm afraid I might not have as many erudite analogies as Edwin. But for me, I think what this will reveal is that as the high streets become a less attractive place to go, then you could say that the civil servers, the elderly generation, they're now using digital financial services, whereas beforehand they would just happily trot out to their local branch. And you'd probably have to argue that you could call that demographic the civil servers. You could call them underbanked, because if they've not been availing themselves of all these lovely digital financial services tools that have emerged over the last five or so years, then they are underbanked. They're digitally underbanked. So we'll start to see lots more of that now, whereby your civil server, if they think, oh well, maybe if I could check my balance online, then maybe I can apply for an account online, and maybe they can then broaden the range of financial services that they're using, full stop, not just whether it be on the high street or via a branch. So I think that's one of the main things we'll see in terms of exposing the elderly generation as being underbanked, because they're digitally underbanked.
Absolutely, and we've got to give a shout out to our friends at Free2, to the new bank designed at freeing up assets for that exact generation, hitting that exact point. Lastly, Diane, what is in your crystal ball? Where do you see the future going, particularly in the UK, of inclusion?
Well, I think the pandemic has accelerated that whole shift to digital, and just to pick up on what Edwin has said, what David said is around the user experience, but equally how rapidly everybody has been forced to do things digitally. And I can't remember the last time I had cash on me. And I think thinking about the older generation, I think there's a huge opportunity for fintech now to tailor products and services to a generation that have suddenly become very digitally savvy. My own mum, for example, refused to go near online banking, refused to use her card at a cash machine. And now she's like, right, well, I want a smartphone and I want online banking. And she is the perfect customer. And there are so many other things that you can add on. If we look at some of the products out there for small businesses, where it's not just about a means to payment, it's a full suite of other things that they can do to help them manage their business more effectively, to helping them with tax returns. So products with financial advice, what to do with your savings. I think the opportunities are endless.
Also want to say my gran still, I'm waiting for her to change, but she still has her debit card wrapped in silver foil because she is terrified of people coming near her and stealing her money through NFC, which I don't think she's ever going to change. Thank you so much for all of this, guys. That's been absolutely brilliant and insightful, and I've got a couple of really nice little snippets that are going to stick in my head there. Where can we find out more about you? Edwin, what's the best way of getting in contact with you, and when does the crowdfunding end?
So the crowdfunding actually wraps up next week. So we're just doing a final push on that. So I think we're very excited about that. We've got a lot of plans of what we're going to do after that. And in order, in terms of reaching us, you can find us, obviously the website's money.com, MUNIY.com, and at Money Mobile on Twitter.
Excellent. And David, yourself?
Yeah, well, best way to get to know us at the moment, because we certainly aren't trotting around, going to lots of trade shows and conferences. So the best way to get to know us at the moment, head over to whoyou.com, and we're running drop-in demos whereby you can just jump in, and have a look at me doing a demo of HooYu. It will show you how it all works and how we can make your customer onboarding really easy and help you acquire customers from all walks of life.
Excellent. And yourself, Dan, any trade shows over the next few weeks?
Well, all very virtually, I'm afraid, but no, but it's great. So yeah, we're at prepaidforum.org, O-R-G, and you can also find us on Twitter at prepaidintforum, and we're also on. We also have a page on LinkedIn where you can find out all the different things we're doing to help the industry thrive during a crisis and very certainly beyond.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, everyone.